Okay, welcome to another episode of Learning for Truth and Love. Today we have our guest back, Dr. Jomo Mutegi, joining us to continue this conversation on raising and educating Black boys. I know that we've had conversations, with my work related to even raising and educating Black girls. We're focusing on Black boys for several reasons. Dr. Mutegi, you have two sons, and it's always helpful when we're talking about these conversations to have someone talk from a position of expertise as well as a position of experience. One of the great things about having Dr. Mutegi here today is he is a science education researcher that comes from a position of experience, of not just experience, but also of research. And we all know that, what we do every day influences the way we think, our background, and having that research background does help to put things in perspective, albeit sometimes it may or may not influence, how we see things. But normally, in a lot of cases, I find that it does. So, welcome again, Dr. Mutegi, to the show. Why don't you go ahead and reintroduce yourself and maybe shed some light on some things we talk about that maybe kept still going around in your head from our last conversation before we move forward?
Yeah. So thank you for the invitation, Dr. Quinlan. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Jomo Mutegi, and I'm a science educator. I currently work at Old Dominion University in Hampton Roads, Virginia. My research work deals with the science, teaching, and learning of Black children, Black people in general. And the focus is on using science in a way that's going to help us to, using our science knowledge in a way that's going to help us to change and improve our social condition.
Mm-hmm.
So that is my professional focus, but it's not very different from my personal focus, which is always on searching for and finding ways to improve the Black community, whether that's through my work at home as a father and a husband, or supporting friends, or even civic work where I may do volunteer work, or just making decisions every day that may be inconvenient at times, but will positively impact the world in which we live for Black people.
Awesome. Before I even get to my questions, it's interesting that you said, that it meshes with your personal goal to improve our community. And I know that one of the things that I've observed with you is that you've written a book. And I know we didn't really touch on it last time, but of course I couldn't help but notice, there was a Black boy featured on the book. I imagine that was also intentional. So tell us about what made you decide to write that, and how do you think that, how does that mesh with your goals, even the personal ones?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a fairly long route that got me to writing the book.
Hmm.
So initially, maybe back in 2012, 2013, I had began making this argument for science education that's more meaningful for students. And it's funny, I just saw a meme this morning, a skit, an internet skit. In the skit, this character had defaulted on his taxes, and his lawyer is telling him that he's facing legal trouble. And he says, "Oh, don't worry about it. I can factor a quadratic equation." And the attorney said, "Well, that's not going to help you with the taxes." He said, "Okay, okay." I read War and Peace, and basically the joke is he's trying to pull from all these things he learned in school, but none of it is helping him deal with this issue of these taxes. And so my research was saying, look, we need to shift what we're doing in science classes. I mean, the Krebs cycle and centrifugal force, that's interesting, I guess, but it doesn't help people make regular daily decisions about what to eat. What can I use on my hair? Should I use this new technology or not? And I got so much pushback from teachers. So as a science educator, we primarily teach teachers. And so in my teacher education PD, there was pushback. In my classes, pre-service teachers, there was pushback. And I realized the population I'm trying to reach ultimately is Black children. The teachers who I was faced with most times, that's not their primary concern. Their primary concern is themselves. And so they were not willing to upset their systems they have in place, the system in which they work, which has a reward structure. And so I began looking for ways to get this different perspective on science in front of children. And that's how I came up with the children's books. And it's not just children's books that has the most visibility, but I also do I create what I call family activities. So this is like a lesson plan that a teacher would go through, but it's stripped down of all the extraneous material so that a parent can just read through it and engage in an activity with their child. And the parent doesn't even need answers to these science questions. They just have to direct the child's attention to science questions. The activity itself should ignite curiosity in the child. And that is a good enough starting point for someone to learn the science of these things down the line. But more than learning the science, they're learning the practical implication of science through these activities. And
Okay.
so that's how I came to writing children's books in general.
Okay.
And I think the first one I had came out in maybe 2013, 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I'm embarrassed to even let anybody see that book. It was so bad. But it's been a learning process where I'm
Yeah.
learning the craft of book publishing,
Mm-hmm.
how to put together an attractive book, a compelling
Mm-hmm.
book, some of the industry guidelines.
Right.
And so the book that you're referring to came out just last year, 2024, and it's the first
Awesome.
novel that I've written.
Okay.
So it's about 300 pages total. The story's a little bit less. There's front matter and back matter.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, the protagonist is a middle school age African American boy,
Mm-hmm.
and basically his part of the story, the plot centers around his growth
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that he's coming to terms with the heavy-handed father that he lives with.
Mm-hmm.
And so his father's a strict disciplinarian. He's politically and socially conscious African man. And so he has rules and guidelines and limits, and it drives his son crazy. And so, without giving too much, basically, it's the boy being sent away to a camp and
Mm-hmm.
meeting some other boys at this camp, and through this camp, and then other men, of course, at the camp. And then
Mm-hmm.
through this experience, gaining an appreciation for much of the discipline that his father has worked to instill in him.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, of course, a science element. And so there's science all throughout the book. There's
Mm-hmm.
these touch points where a parent reading it with a child can draw the child's attention to science throughout the everyday lives of the people involved. But the
Mm-hmm.
big science focus is when the boys are transported. I don't know if it's transported, if they travel to another planet, and they've got to figure out how to keep themselves safe while
Mm-hmm.
find their way back home.
Nice.
This one centers on a black boy. Not all my books center on black boys.
Mm-hmm.
The way I say it is all the books foreground whole intact black families. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's one story based on a true story. The main character, his father died when he was young. But
Mm-hmm.
I wrote when I wrote the book, I always referred to his father's influence. I think the father died by the time that the boy was 7 years old, somewhere in there. He was fairly young,
Mm-hmm.
but the influence that father was able to have from age birth to 7 was profound and really shaped the course of this young man's life. And
Mm-hmm.
so, although the father's not physically there, and if you read the book, his presence is very pronounced. And I think that's important for us as a community to see models of whole, intact families, and that's what we should
Mm-hmm.
aspire to. The family is the
Awesome.
first primary unit in
Mm-hmm.
any social movement, so we're not going very far in terms of social progress without whole, intact families.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So many questions from that. You know, before I ask you these questions, because I'm so curious about what type of disciplines you think our sons need, I want to say that it sounds like you and I have had a very similar journey in trying to figure out, how to bridge, theory and practice in some ways, right? Which has always been my goal as well. I'm thinking about, well, now that we know all of this in research, what would it mean for the classroom? And one of the things I found, even with some of the pushback, with teachers' goals are to teach, right? And without the curricula already out there, it's almost like we're asking teachers to take on a completely different job that often is taken on by curriculum developers and textbook companies. And so I think that what I love is the fact that we're able to, and which is why I focus on what goes into a curriculum and how to create a curriculum that we can contribute to that, right? Because we would contribute from our perspectives, from our experience, and from what we believe is important for boys to know, which is really why and what is important for our children to know in general, even though today we're focusing on black boys in general. In thinking about, even your experience and, you're writing, talking about the book, that you felt like there were certain things that, this father wanted to teach his son. What are some things that you think is really important for us? I know the last time you talked about values. Can you think of anything else add to that in terms of goals? what are some disciplines and that we want our sons to come away with, if you can think of additional ones from those values you had expressed in the last part?
Yeah. When we last spoke, I talked about virtues broadly.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting you asked that question related to the book because in the story, there are when Kamal's the name of the main character.
Mm-hmm.
So when Kamal is at the camp, and it's called the camp experience is called the Aket. Let me just digress for a moment just to explain to the listeners.
It's called what?
The Aket. It's
Okay.
Akhet.
Okay.
And Aket is an ancient Kemetic term, and it represents a period of the flooding of the Nile. So most literally, it's translated as the inundation. And physically, the land of ancient Kemet was inundated, submerged underwater during this season. And their seasons are organized into 3 seasons, and the Aket is one season. Just happens to correspond with what we would consider summer here. And so the founders of this camp called it the Aket because metaphorically they're inundating these young men into the life of this community. And so Kamal's father and the men that founded the Aket, I think if they were asked what are some of the values or virtues or even goals they would want to instill in the young men, in its most simplest form, they emphasize that a man's role is to provide for and to protect his community. And community is his family most immediately, wife and children, but then those around him that he would embrace as his community. I don't think that they would argue that all Black people would be the community. They function in very close knit circles. So, in fact, in Kamal's neighborhood in particular, it's he describes it as a 3 square blocks. That's his neighborhood, but it's in the middle of a drug infested, blighted inner city. Well, his father and his father's friend went into this inner city and started buying up houses and refurbishing them. And they chased out the drug dealers and the criminal element. And then they would buy a house, invite somebody to be part of the community until they expanded to what the time I spoke with Kamal was 3 square blocks. And so I'm sure if you talk to Jabari, Kamal's father, he would not say that all Black people is his community. He would say, no, people in these 3 square blocks is my community. That's what I'm protecting. Right? So just to give me some context there. So that's in a very broad sense. And what's very interesting is what's needed to be in a position to provide and protect. And that's something that's sorely missing nowadays. And I think we could go back to those same virtues. Life is hard. Once a week, we have a very large yard. Our property is on 2 acres and it's mostly lawn. I got to take care of that every week. Every week for about a day or a day and a half, I'm outside in Virginia sun, mowing, trimming, cutting, hauling. Okay. And are you still with me? Okay.
Yes.
And so sometimes at the end of it all, I'm asking myself, man, what was accomplished? What was accomplished was you got about 4 or 5 more days of decent looking yard, and in 4 or 5 more days, you gonna have to do it again. Okay. Being a father is difficult work. So my son now is 10, and there are things that he has not internalized that we have been telling him he needs to internalize for at least 4 years. 4 years. As an adult, I'm scratching. I don't understand why it takes so long to learn these basic messages.
Oh my goodness.
But the reality is that is a task of a father. We're not gonna give up on our children. So if you
Right.
can't learn, say, to tie your shoes in 2, 3 weeks, say maybe it takes 2, 3 months. If you can't learn to potty in a few weeks, what am I gonna do? Just let you go through life soiling yourself? No. We're gonna take 6 months, a year, however long it takes.
Yeah.
And tying shoes and using potty are simpler in terms of the time. But some of these basic principles, like be honest, be courageous, face your punishment. If you do something wrong, you're going to have to own up to it. If you wrong someone, you have to apologize. These are things that require ongoing repetition. Go to bed at a reasonable hour, wake up at a reasonable hour, clean up after yourself. Now, I'm going to ask this question of you, Catherine. It's rhetorical, so you can answer or
Yeah.
not answer. Your listeners can answer or not answer. How often do you go into a place to transact business and you just wish the people on the other end of the transaction had some these basic practices or habits? Look you in the eye when they speak. Enunciate so you can understand what they're saying. give you a reasonable explanation without having an attitude. All right. So these are things that take a very long time to develop in young people, but they're critical to us functioning as a whole intact society.
Wow. It's a good question. And for me these days, I'm thinking of other practices that I get concerned about, which is just how, my son is interacting with his friends. Are they communicating, or are they sitting in front of a video game box,
Right.
right? And so, those are things that I think about because, my thinking is, well, you have your friend here. And I know there are different ways to play now, right? You're playing games, it can be board games versus the other thing. But my goal and my challenge is I want him to have a variety of experiences. And so what I've done is on and off. I've given him opportunities to, for example, at one of his schools, he was introduced to Prodigy, which I don't mind because there's some learning component attached to there. And so, now and again, when he plays with it, his friend would come and play. And then at in another grade, he was introduced to Roblox. And, there are times when I was happy that there was the creative format versus just sitting there playing. But we do we do limit the screen time. We do not only limit it, there are moments where we've given him time just to allow him to see how this thing is drawing him, and allow him to kind of make decisions, because I want him to understand addiction as well, right? I want him to understand it now so that he understands what's happening. And so I have this conversation where I say, okay, well, right now this thing is controlling you. You're not controlling it. And so we have those type of conversations. But I wanted to say something, speak something to what you said, because my husband and I, we have this conversation where, um, looking at father and son's relationships, very different, right? From mom and son, very important relationship.
Yes.
And sometimes I find that I'm more patient, with the goals than his father is. He want him to get something right away, and I'm like, well, it's gonna take time, just and it's gonna take repetition because of things become habit. And so those are conversations we end up having because I'm a little bit more open to, whereas my husband's a little bit more traditional in the way he thinks about parenting. He wants him to obviously obey right away and things like that, which it's not a bad thing. But sometimes, our thinking with that predisposition can also, like, I would always have to remind him, that that since we've we've different parenting styles. And since I've raised him with a little bit of freedom of expression, sometimes that comes along with challenges, right? Especially if as a parent, you want him to just simply obey without thinking. And so, I bring that up because, we were talking about things you wanted him to internalize. And I wanted to also say that as we keep working on things, it's been good to see that there are glimpses of hope, right? There are moments where, like, oh, wait a second, oh, good, it's actually, you see it later on, right? That your hard work was not in vain. That some of the things you want him to internalize, we've had to shift the way we think about it. One of the things we do, for example, and speaking of community, is we've done this by exploring churches, for example. And so we've gone to different churches, and then we find one. We've gone to one for a couple of weeks, and then we explored it out for a couple of weeks, and then we found it out, and we think we like this one more. We see whether or not there's a ministry and things like that, and the classes for kids, because the internalization thing is so, they internalize sometimes the unintentional things that we don't want them to, because it's what's
Right.
happening in society. And then they
Right.
internalize the things we're intentional about, like I had to learn to be intentional. I'm just so curious as to what are some of those things you've wanted him to internalize, and I'm happy to share some of mine.
You mean in terms of my son?
Yeah, and even your sons, and even the role of churches. I'm just leaving that open.
Well, I can't speak to. I guess I could. Again, I would go back to the thing I've mentioned earlier, and then also last week is these the virtues.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that I would want my son or any young man to internalize. And when I say internalize, I mean they become a part of you such that you don't really have to think about it. It becomes automatic.
Yeah.
You do it without being told, without much conscious effort. In fact,
Mm.
Once a virtue is internalized, you find it difficult to do otherwise.
Mhm.
So just let's look at honesty as an
Mm.
example.
Yeah.
A person who has an honest nature doesn't have to decide, should I lie in this situation or should I tell the truth? In fact,
Mm.
if it's better to lie, that person has to think of creative ways to tell the truth.
Mm. But
And
you
that's
know,
refreshing. It's refreshing to deal with someone who
yeah.
you look at and understand, this is just an honest person. I know I'm gonna get a
Mhm.
straight answer. They might try to, give me some sugar with it so it'll go down easy, but they're gonna give me the truth.
Yeah.
As opposed to a person you interact with and you lead a conversation like, I don't know what to take of that because the person lies so much. It may be truth, it may be a lie. I have no idea what to do.
Mhm.
And so for me, internalization is really reforming or reshaping the person's personality, such that
Mhm.
they can't help but to embody these virtues. Now, you
Wow.
ask about church in particular, where church is concerned,
Yeah.
that's tricky because we use church, I think, in a blanket sense. I mean, all churches not created equal. All the people in church,
Yeah.
Eddie Long was a minister of a big church in Atlanta,
Mhm.
but he was so bad people called him Eddie Wrong. So I mean, I'm not at all going to say that the church represents the embodiment of these virtues. I think maybe in some
Good point.
idealized sense for some people it may, but in practice we see churches run the whole gamut. So more than what's represented in a church as an
Mhm.
organization, I would want my son to embody these. Again, I'll just keep going back to these virtues that represent
Wow.
um, decency in people, that really make it easier for people to get along with each other and to accomplish things in the natural world.
Mhm. Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. There's so much you said there. Well, I guess, in terms of addressing church, for me, I completely agree. I've explored so many different churches and trying to figure out what it is. And it's not so much because of the church, of the idea of the church itself. I try to look for a place where I feel like there's something good, whether it's in teaching of parts of the Bible or where they're thinking about it, that will resonate with my son, that he can internalize. Because I see the influence of being in that space, whatever repetitious space, as being very similar to whatever else he's exposed to, right? Whether it's practices every day in school, whether it's watching TV, I almost see television or video game as another, I think of it as another church, right? Because there's a thinking there that's being disseminated intentionally or unintentionally, whether it's, especially when I think about these new influencers, these guys that a lot of our kids are running after and thinking is, whatever examples. And so I use it that way in terms of, what am I not giving him at home, or he might not get at home simply with being with me or being with us as parents? Because I find also, even with my son, it's almost like if he has to also hear it from other people, right? It's always helpful. And also, it becomes a conversation piece where, okay, so this is what I value. And I get to see his reaction and things like that. And the only reason I mean, and we've been skipping around trying to figure things out. The only one of the reason it has become important to me is I want to make sure that he is thinking of when he hits challenges later on. He is thinking of, and he has access to other ways to cope with challenges, right? Whether it's learning how to pray, whether it's learning how to read, whether it's, as opposed to just running to just listen to other people or just listen to this person. I want him to figure out how to learn how to, and you're talking about the virtues, find ways inside of you, right? And let's, it's funny. There are a couple of things I was thinking even about honesty. It's one of the things we've had to talk about and think about even in parenting strategies, mainly because you start to see where even our parenting style, and even as a teacher, you'd find that sometimes one of the things that affects that is, how high are the stakes? Is there a cost for the child? And so we've had to even talk about it, and even reward it. Yes, this is what we value. This is what's important. This is what this honesty. This is what happened because you were dishonest, or this is what happened when you're honest. Like when the stakes are high. I mean, take one example. I guess the easiest example to give is, when I was a teacher, I found that the kids who had more pressure from parents at home, seemed more likely to, let's just say, not be honest about what was going on because um because of maybe consequences, right? If a parent expects a lot from you at home, then you're trying to save yourself kind of thing, right? Save face, because the parents are really important to you and facing them is really important to you. And for me, knowing that as a teacher has helped me even think about the way of parenting and thinking of honesty and seeing the way I've had to talk about it, because I got to see that when the stakes were low, these kids are blunt, honest. Yeah, I didn't do that. Yes, I messed up here. Versus other kids where the stakes are higher home will blame you as a teacher instead of taking responsibility for not doing their own work. Do you see what I'm saying? So I find that there's so much nuances and just helping them to be aware of, is there a cost for me bringing my honest self forward? And sometimes even feeding the unintentionals, right? Whether or not, we're facilitating honest conversation. Like I've had this conversation. I said, look, if you're going to respond like that, I mean, my husband, we talk about it. If you're going to respond like that, he may not want to be honest about it because he might think there's a cost there that he's not willing to pay, you know? As opposed to him being open, and he'll just start talking and just being open about what's going on. So it's very, it's amazing. There's no clear cut thing to parenting, is there? It's just how are all these interactions going, is what I found.
Yeah. Did you want me to respond to that, or were you just sharing that?
Both.
Yeah. So, a couple thoughts occurred to me as I was listening to you. The first thought was about the stakes. Did you say stakes or consequences? I think you said how high are the stakes, or
Yeah,
how
both.
high are the
The higher the
consequences? Yeah.
stakes and the consequences. Yeah, both.
Yeah. So, okay. So the first thought is, and this is really an advantage for parents, for us as parents. And I think as parents, we want to create an environment where our children can mess up and not be irreparably damaged. So our home should be a safe place to mess up, to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
Now, because children are children, stakes can be pretty high when they're not really high. And so loss of dessert for the week might be really, really high stakes to a 7-year-old.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. And so this leads to the second part. I wouldn't want to create a human being where the world around them has to change to accommodate their personality or their disposition. I would want to create a human being that can adapt their personality or disposition to the world around them. Because that's the only thing they really have control over, is themselves.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, this scenario is looking at something that's high stakes, and we've seen a lot in national politics the past few months. So the executive branch says to a law firm, unless you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to receive punishment J. Let's say punishment P. Or you go to a mayor and say, we're going to indict you, and the mayor says, well, come, let me help you with this, and then I can avoid my indictment. And what we're finding is that it's like the psychological study where the researcher wore a lab coat and said, administer more shock, and the participants kept administering more shock until death. I think it was 30-40% of the time they killed somebody on the other side of a wall, as far as they knew,
Right.
just because the man told them to. I don't want that kind of person. Not in my society. I want my person to be strong enough to say, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing regardless of the consequences, because it's the right thing.
Absolutely.
And I might use loss of a dessert to teach that message to a 7-year-old. I might use loss of a play date to teach that message to a 10-year-old.
Right.
I might use you can't drive the car with a 16-year-old, but we have to repeatedly give them opportunities to face consequences. And then we coach them through that. Like, look, I know it's terrible. It stinks you're not going to have dessert. It stinks that you can't do the play date, that you're going to miss out on this weekend with your friends. But this is the consequence. Now, what kind of person do you want to be?
Absolutely.
And then, now look, all the parenting that we do, at the end of the day, people going to be who they're going to be. So we do our best job for 18, 20, 22 years, or what have you. And then at some point, we got to watch and say, you know what? I did the best I can do.
Absolutely.
But we definitely have to do the best we can do, because we see the consequence of not making any effort. And we're producing people who can't stand up to a little bit of inconvenience. They will capitulate. They will do something terribly wrong. They will harm thousands just to save themselves. That's not the kind of world I want to live in.
No, absolutely not. Wow. And a lot of that, oh my goodness, a lot of that comes from our ability to set boundaries. I think that's one of the most important thing we can teach our child, our children, how to set boundaries for themselves, for others. If they can't set boundaries for themselves, they're definitely not going to be able to set it for others. you
Absolutely.
know and I'm always reminded of, I had a colleague who, we used to talk about how she raised her son constantly, and I would constantly ask her questions. And one of the things she brings up is that she and another parent, when they attended this orientation, were the only ones who left, and they were like, "Nope, you're in college now. You take care of stuff." And for us as parents, we want to raise kids that we know we've prepared them enough to leave them to make their decisions, right? And we can trust them to make their decisions, to advocate for themselves. That's a big thing. That's one of the reasons. Whenever things happen, I would talk to him first and just say, go back and ask. Of course, this is not going to happen if you don't ask, if you don't say. There's right. Someone would say no. Someone would say, but training our kids to learn to communicate and to speak. And also, one of the things you said, I wanted to touch on. You talk about creating opportunities. I'd love to talk about that some more, because a lot of times, we talk now about the problems, right? We talk about the problems, whether it's computers, games, or whatever it is. But I find, and this is something that I wrestle with, I always have to ask myself, okay, if I don't want him to do this, what are the other opportunities I have for him that are not only equally attractive, but also that exists, right? That are accessible to him, to do, right? I mean, some of these opportunities even cost, right? So I don't want him sitting there playing video games. So what is he going to do? What's the alternative? We've been fortunate to be a part of a community where he can say, okay, go outside there and with his friends, or, go and play something else, or go and swim, or go and do, creating those opportunities. If you don't have those other opportunities, and your son sees that as the only opportunity, that's what they're going to do all day. I'm so curious about your perspective on just that idea of expanding on creating
Yeah.
opportunities. What does that mean?
Yeah. I'll share a story with an event that happened with my older son when he was much
Mm-hmm.
younger. I had gone away for a summer, um, not the whole summer. I think it was maybe a month. I did
Mm-hmm.
a research trip to South Africa, and when I was there, I didn't watch any TV,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't sworn off TV, but it was only three channels,
Mm-hmm.
and two of them were in languages I couldn't understand, so it just was nothing really to watch. So I just found other stuff to do. But it
Yeah.
gave me such a clarity of mind that when I reflected on it, I said, wow, I really like the way my mind is free without
Mm.
having the TV. And
Yeah.
so when I got back, I just kept that practice. I rarely turned
Mm-hmm.
on the TV. I would maybe watch a movie in the evening once or twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
And so my son, then now he has to adapt to dad's new thing.
Mm.
And so no, we're not turning the TV on. You find something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first few weeks, I was running around trying to ensure that he had some other alternative entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know what caused it to hit me, but it hit me. I said, "Well, what are you doing? I mean, he's a little boy. He got a mind. He's creative. You're a
Mm-hmm.
grown man. You're not obligated to be his playmate.
Right.
Nobody was your playmate when you were that age." And so, I mean, he has a safe house. He has a decent sized yard. He has
Mm-hmm.
bikes. He has plenty of toys. He has books.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So when I would get the "there's nothing to do, I'm bored,"
Mm.
my response became, "Go find something to do and
Right.
don't bother me again."
Mm-hmm.
And so the go find something to do is awkward for a parent. It almost feels as though you're rejecting your child or neglecting them, but you're not. What you're
Mm-mm.
doing is you're creating space for them to be children.
Absolutely.
And if for many of us, I'm 55. I remember when I was younger, we would go outside with a jar
Mm.
and we would with a jar catch every kind of bug we can, put them in this little ecosystem and watch them wreak havoc on each other. We put spiders in there, watch the spiders' eggs hatch. I can't tell you how much we learned about insects playing with this, just a simple jar. But we were
Yeah.
told you're not going to be in the house all day. Go outside, find something to do.
Right.
And so the creativity, the inventiveness, the solving problems came
Mm-hmm.
from being told to go find something to do. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that we, as parents, as long as we're sure that they have a safe space, we're not going to say go play in traffic.
Right.
But their space is safe. They have things to work with.
Mhm.
Let them go. Give them
Yeah.
free, uninterrupted time, uninterrupted by us, unmonitored by us, where we're not, coaching and refereeing the games for them.
Right.
Give them other kids. Sometimes they're with themselves, sometimes
Mhm.
siblings, friends, but sometimes themselves. And that creativity is an essential part of the learning process. I'm
Mhm.
sure as an educator, you know the importance of the role of play in learning.
Absolutely.
So we're really deprive them almost by not telling them to go find something to do and giving them
Mhm.
that free space and time to explore and to play.
Absolutely. Wow. It's funny. As soon as you said the word bored, I wrote the word boredom. I was like, yeah, I want to talk about that because, now we've gone through phases in our parenting, depending on which age range or which group, which age he is, depending on our own situation, depending on how tired we are and things like that. And in being even with our new move, it was an adjustment. And so we're like, okay, we'll let everybody adjust. And then we're like, okay, yeah, you can't sit there playing. We need to give you boundaries, need to give you time. And then of course, the idea of being bored came out. I was like, okay, that's okay. Because this is a great time, a great opportunity for you to learn to figure out how to regulate yourself, right? How to make those choices, how to, well, it's gonna be as boring as you decide. And so, it's forced him to think about things to do, other things to do, and it forced him to do other things with his friends. Like the other day, he's like, oh, yeah, I hate badminton, I hate badminton. He went and he played badminton with his friend. Things like that.
What's so bad?
Giving him what?
It turns out badminton is not so bad.
Right. Well, that's the whole goal because I think
Mhm.
you think as parents, one of the things I've had to do is had the courage to say no, right? Because my son is very persistent. He wants the and he makes a good argument, right? And I have to remember it forces us to, yes, I have to stick to this no because he's just as determined, very determined. Oh my goodness, right?
Yeah, I'll
And
share
so,
another script that parents can use. If they're bored enough, they can always work with you. So, oh,
mhm.
you don't have nothing to do. You can help me wash these dishes. You bored? Well, I got a floor over here that needs to be swept.
I know.
They're gonna find something to do real quick. And so that is another option. We give them some work. They can do some work with you around the house.
Right. And it's speaking of that, it's been interesting for us. We have always separated for years, what our child does more with what we do in terms of even shows we've watched. We've been very intentional. I've been more cautious because I tended to think that a lot of these shows are created for kids, really aren't for kids. And so, and a lot of these shows are just adult stories kind of packaged in little children,
Mhm.
and so I really struggled with that for years. I in we waited to introduce him to TV. And we were fortunate, we had a house with a basement, and that was his playroom, and he had all this stuff. And we were fortunate in having been able, we were able to wait until he's 5, introduce him a little bit of TV. And we had a backyard at a time for him to play. But part of his transition now where it's like, you know what, seeing all these influences, like, yeah, let's make sure he's a part of our world more in terms of we watch similar things and talk, because everything at the end of the day is going to always be about building habits, right? And he's either developing these habits with these people he's hanging out with, right? Whether he's watching these YouTube, they can appear harmless, but I always wonder, and so I've become a part of, we're kind of like, okay, let's figure out how we can let these worlds mesh so we can either talk about it, either figure out what's going on, figure out what that influence is, figure out what fascination he's developing, or, things like that. Those are conversations that we've been having because he's entering the teenage years. And I have a belief about entering teenage years that may be different from other people do. Like, I think that as a society, we have this habit of, oh, we give them the freedom to do whatever, just because he's a boy, man, he gets to whatever. I think that at that age, I think that from my own observation and even seeing a lot of discussions now, I think they need more direction. They need more influence and more guidance, and even guidance in terms of what is it you want to do, and let me figure out what are the scaffolds that are healthy, as opposed to leaving you to find out and leaving these people because somebody's influencing your child. It's either you or you've entrusted him to the rest of society's thinking. And that's been my thinking. And I found that's been helpful, and I've been seeing some fruitful results from reining in and having these discussions now that he's becoming a teenager. You don't release them to the world to do whatever they want. You're shaping the future man, and I want to make sure I have a child who becomes a man I respect. You know what I mean? And so that's been my thinking about this, and I'm so curious about your thoughts.
It's very much the same. And with our younger son, we've adopted, sounds like, pretty much the same practice that you described. So, very limited screen time. And as we've released more screen time to him, it's not just unregulated. So, it started with a couple of hours a week and always with us watching with him, and then being very specific, curating what is acceptable for him to watch, to look at. And then as he's gotten older, so he just turned 10 this year, actually last week, about a week ago. And so I'd say maybe the past year and a half, 2 years, we've been much more intentional about helping him to understand the way that messages are communicated through media.
Mm.
So, what is the plot? What are themes? What is a narrative? How can you identify these? And of course, in an age appropriate way.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just as simple as asking questions. Now, did you see
Yeah.
what that man said to that woman? What do you think about that?
Mm.
Have you ever seen anybody talk like that? Look at what this
Mhm.
person's wearing. Have you
Yeah.
seen anybody wear something like that? Why do you think they made this person wear this outfit here as opposed to
Mm.
something? What do you think they want the viewer? What do they want you to feel or think as you're watching this? And so these are the types of questions and experiences that will help him to become a critical viewer. The challenge with media is that it is a very powerful mechanism that's
Mm-hmm.
used to shape and control people.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't get away from our children are not going to live in a world where there's no screens.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's true.
But at the very least, they can live in a world where they are able to be critical and aware of what's coming at them in the
Mm-hmm.
screens. I'd
Yeah.
rather they look at the screen and be insulted
Mm-hmm.
because they know what's being communicated than to be
Right.
assaulted because they
Mm-hmm.
don't know what's coming at them. All right. There's a resource you may be familiar with. I'm not sure if your listeners are, but it's called Common Sense Media.
Yeah.
Common Sense Media. And so that is a good resource for
Yeah.
helping to
I use it.
identify not only movies, but movies, video games, podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, used to be you could put on the Andy Griffith show, grandma, ma, child, all watch it and everybody be happy. Nobody be uncomfortable or offended.
Mm.
And it was actually entertaining. You watch some of those old sitcoms are actually funny. There's no sexual innuendo, no cursing, but it's still humorous. And oftentimes they kind of carry a message.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those days are gone. So to your point, even things that are packaged for children, they have messages in them very often that many of us as parents don't want our children exposed to. We don't agree
Mm-hmm.
with. And we can't just trust that this is made for kids, therefore it's okay. Put it on and
Yeah.
walk away. So common sense media is a tool that we use if we don't have time to vet. And who does? I mean, we can vet something, but I don't have 2 hours to watch something before we
Mm-hmm.
all sit down and watch together for 2 hours, and very likely more than 2 hours because you've got to go through multiple things before you find something that's appropriate.
Yeah.
So that's one resource. And the last thing on this topic, I'll say the book that you asked about earlier, the novel.
Mm-hmm.
I was very intentional in writing it that it be something that all generations could sit down, read, and nobody be uncomfortable.
Right.
No, I'm not going to say no parent would be bothered by anything in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's fighting in it, there's killing in it,
Mm-hmm.
so that might be offensive to people. But
Mm-hmm.
there's no vulgarity, there's no sexual innuendo, those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting you said that because in terms of even me writing my books, I I was very intentional as well.
uh,
Just about, what to include. And I really think we need to get back to a time when we think about what's important for our kids to know. And I know that we are normalizing them to a certain world, but I think exposure to some things, too early is really opening. It's like opening a can of worms, right?
yes.
And I know I remember going through a phase where I was trying to find shows that were, written for Black kids by Black authors and things like that. And then we found, I was so happy we found, oh my gosh, what's that show called? It's Family Reunion.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would watch that together, and he loved it, and he continues to, he likes that show as well. Really looking for which one is really targeting our kids in a positive way, and which is really helping them to embrace their heritage as well. And so
Right.
that was a show that I stumbled upon that I really liked because it situated it in that dynamics. Yeah, so that was a goal of mine, just to really see if there was, what can influence him that he's viewing, in identity forming ways as well, and that led me also to, we go on more vacations with large family vacations. We've been fortunate to have, a particular part and group of our family um, that has been really been a positive influence and positive things going on, and just really positive everything about it to allow him to appreciate his Black heritage in that way. I guess that covers more or less what I thought of talking about today. So if there's anything you think is important that we left out in any way that you want to address, or I don't mind you asking me questions like you did earlier, that's fine too. So feel free, or we can wrap up. Either is fine.
Yeah, I do want to add a thing to what you just shared, and then also I do have a question for you. Uh, you were talking about family reunion and
Mhm.
your search for positive media. So the
Mhm.
thing I wanted to add was that there's a big need for, as you mentioned, Black stories told by Black creators,
Mhm.
but that also reflect Black decency. And so I have a friend who asked the question. He said,
Hugely.
you're a music artist and you can create your own video.
Mhm.
Why you get locked up in your own video? Why you lose when you tell your own story?"
Sorry.
And it's so often, and there's so with the advent of Tubi now, there's a lot of independent films, a lot of Black independent films,
Mhm.
but we're recreating the same Black exploitation that whites created for us back in the 70s. So
Mhm.
we have this ability, we have the technology, we have a platform for
Mhm.
distribution, but we're
Yeah.
still creating the same exploitative films, telling the same sad story. We're
Mhm.
rarely showing ourselves in a space of empowerment. The success of Black Panther shows that Black people want to see Black people living good, doing good, and winning. So you think we would have more of that than what we have.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say amen to uh, to
Yeah.
your claim there. So the question I had was if you could just share a little bit more about your books. So I know you produced a set of books. I know it's
Mhm.
from a grant funded project.
Mm.
It wasn't funded by NSF?
So no, not the set of books.
Okay.
Um, so I started writing a chapter book series inspired by my son. And so it has nothing to do with those funding because I felt exactly the same need. Like, how
Mhm.
can we have, and even to, before I tell you about the books, I want to answer what you mentioned before. I think that, why are we saying those same stories over and over again? And I think it comes back to, we do need to do the internal work that includes not only renewing our minds, decolonizing our minds. We need to do the internal work to get us to that space, whatever that happy medium space. And I mean happy go lucky, but you're going to produce what is inside to produce. Nothing is coming out of there. Nothing is coming out that isn't already in there, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And so it requires that internal space, and in addition to the education. And that journey is a really long journey. I mean, I can have I talk about that forever, but I've been in this journey for years. Okay. And I'm not talking about 5, 10 years. I'm talking about it's a long journey, right? To try to even undo things and to work on things. But I tell this story. I wrote about it in my book, but I'll say it anyway. One day looked at a story, right? This fairy tale. I started crying
Hmm.
because of the way the story was made and because of the way it appreciated that culture. And I thought, I felt the pain. I felt the pain of being a Black child and not being able to have that identity forming story that really embraced you as much as you can embrace it. And so that book came out of, I use different research because I'm doing this curriculum development even before I entered into academia. Before I was funded, I did some research on African rock art, really looking for what are some of our cultural capital. So the first book, To African Back, is based on it's a story made up with that understanding in mind, taking through the children through this journey and discovering different parts of Africa. The second book, which is called Day and Night in the Space Station, I wrote using my background when I taught a course called Life in Space, NASA, ISS, and microgravity, about microgravity. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to use that background. So all of it really is just to infuse. The series is called, as I'm talking about it, it's called the Keystone Passage series. KeystonePassage.com. I trademarked it. And really tapping into what is the science behind that. But at the same time, in that book, they got to discover some history. Not a whole lot, not as much history in that book, but I did touch on just the history of African American scientists and, astronomer and things like that. A little bit, but it was really helping them to understand a little bit about microgravity and some other sciences. The third book, I capitalized on understandings from my research, but I had to do some further research and digging for this particular book. This book, I think I did the most research for, because each time I took myself through these phases. Each time I retrained, and I took all of these classes on fiction writing so that I can really understand, put together a nice story. And so that book, I delved into another aspect of African culture, but used it to take students on a different journey. No violence, no cursing, nothing. Like, can we just have some stories where we can appreciate each other, the dialogue every day, the day-to-day dialogues? Can we appreciate just that slower pacing? And I created that, even though in my mind I thought, you know what, a lot of people may not be as interested in it because it's not gory, it's not violence, it's not whatever. I say, you know what, when we come to that day where we think we really need to rethink how we parent, maybe it'll resonate with someone, and then we'll have something. That's been my thinking. And so throughout the process is, how are we transforming our own thinking? So those are my fiction books. Then, of course, I have my academic book that's called Black Representation in Science Curriculum, Implications for Identity, Belonging, Curriculum Development. Really putting together over 20 years of research and thinking about, our predispositions, which is part one. Part two is the journey, going to the Gullah Geechee Islands as part of my funded project funded by NSF. And then third one is, what can this curriculum look like? So, so my goal has been just creating content because I see myself as, I need to set the tone for what this should look like rather than have someone else set the tone. And a lot of the tone and a lot of the perspectives I have not agreed with, a lot of these perspectives. So I find myself in that awkward position because, it happens, I guess, when you try to do something different and new. But yeah, I hope I answer there.
Yeah, sure. And I just want to encourage you. It's valuable, and I wouldn't be discouraged by the taste of people at large. I think it was Amos Wilson who said that we have to give our people a taste for Blackness. And basically, what he's saying is that there are a lot of things that we will pay for. We'll pay to go to the club, we'll pay to drink, smoke cigarettes, other things. But will we pay? Do we have a taste for those things that are edifying for us?
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is that the society we live in, because it's grounded in a pursuit of profit, there's a consistent race towards vice. So whenever we can appeal to the base nature of humans as organisms, we're usually going to make money. So if you look at our food supply, sugar is in everything, but biologically we're wired to crave sugar. And the more we eat, our gut bacteria that eat sugar increase and send signals to the brain saying, give me more sugar. Yeah. So before you know it, you have a food supply where sugar is in almost everything.
Right. And diabetes.
Insane amounts of sugar. But the encouragement that I would give to you is that although that's where the majority of us are, there's still a decided group of people like you who want something that doesn't appeal to vice, who want something that's slower, that's more intentional, that's more edifying, and they're looking for it. And if we don't make it available, then even that group of holdouts doesn't have anything to draw from and to help build them up. And so it's important that we have works like yours.
Well, I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the encouragement. Yes, every encouragement counts. Wow. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I just want you to say this has been an amazingly fruitful conversation. Any last minute thoughts you want to leave the audience in terms of
I'll
our
just
topic?
say to the audience, if you're interested in learning more about me or my work, I'm going to give you 2 resources. The first is my lab page, and it's www.es2, the number 2, rp.org. Edward Sierra number 2 Romeo Papa.org. And once you're there, there's a bio, there's a list of academic papers we have, and members of my research team are there as well.
Awesome.
And there's a resource page. And if you're interested in the children's books, it's blackkidsread.org. All one word, blackkidsread.org. And the book that Dr. Quinlan and I discussed is Secrets of the Vanguard Order. Secrets of the Vanguard Order. You could type that in as a search, it should come up. Or if you go to blackkidsread.org and type it in, the page will come.
Awesome.
Thanks, Catherine.
Wow. Well, Dr. Mutegi, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone else for joining Learning for Truth and Love. And if you like this, please like it and follow so you can receive notifications on our next episode. Thank you again.